Welcome back to Power Hour. Thank you so very much for joining us today, caring about your world. You know, the kind of people that we like to talk to at the Power Hour are those who have, well, I don't want to just minimize it by saying gone against the grain, but who have really taken a professional position that is either not popular or not accepted by the alleged professional community. And one of those people that we have joining us today, James McCANNey, is just that. He has taught mathematics courses at the university level in addition to physics, computer science, and astronomy, abstract algebra, linear algebra, matrix algebra, probability and statistics, statistics for computing, mathematical logic, theory of numbers, calculus, engineering math, and advanced topics in geometry and topology. He's worked about half of his lengthy career in private industry. He has, much of this was accomplished in multilingual settings, having worked in the U.S., Latin America, and with Russian scientists. And we appreciate so very much him joining us here today, introducing his new book called Comets. Thank you so very much, James McCANNey, for joining us in the Power Hour today.
Joyce, it's very good to be here. Thank you.
Man, you have stood and then you have stood. I cannot believe this. You know, coming from the position that you have in at Cornell University and wherever you have taught, you have gone up against the powers that be and have come out of this unscathed, really. And let's talk about where you came from. You've written a number of books, and your latest one is called Comets. You also do a radio show called At the Crossroads on WWCR, and we'll talk all about that. But you didn't exactly go along to get along when you were in college or after college, did you?
No. My friends in high school, in fact, laughed because, say, in geometry class, I'd come in and I had my own proofs and I had my own, geometry at builds on previous proofs. And I had my own set of proofs. And I'd come in and the teacher would say, how'd you do this? And a lot of times the teacher didn't understand what I had done. And, the kids would laugh at it. And that's where I started. I also started very young looking at what was called the prime number problem, trying to understand the rhythm and patterns of the prime numbers. But when I got through college, I had 3 offers to go to grad school. I had a double major in physics and mathematics, and I thought the world was bright and rosy and honest, and everybody was NASA and the space program and going to the moon and Walter Cronkite. I thought all this was good as gold, and I spent a lot of time in college studying the Apollo manuals and all of the details. But then after college, instead of going to grad school, I had 3 grad school offers to get my PhD at high-ranking physics graduate schools. I decided to put it on hold, and I don't know what I was thinking. Well, I do know what I was thinking. I said I wasn't ready for school yet. I wanted to get out. I wanted to just follow my nose, and so I did. I started out in Mexico, and I taught there for a year in a high school, taught physics and science, mathematics. But what it did is it allowed me to travel. And Mexico is very rich. Got me down to the Belize, Quintana Roo, Guatemala to see the Mayan ruins. And that opened my eyes. And said, wow, something strange is going on here. And I had experiences there which later led into my view of the world today, like a Quetzal bird flying over my head in a little store down in the jungle, a little store made out of thatched roof hut. And when I looked at the Quetzal bird flying over me, the pattern on the bottom of the wings and the feathers of the Quetzal bird with the long bird of paradise tail, I said, that looks like a giant comet. And in fact, that's why they call it the Quetzal bird, because it resembles Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent god of the night sky, which in the legends of the Maya was a great comet whose heart eventually became the planet Venus, and who is central to all of their architecture at Chichen Itza and all the way down to Peru. So after 3 years, I went back to grad school, and I was a real different person. I had my eyes opened. I taught the richest kids in the world. I personally taught them physics and mathematics on a one-to-one basis. That's how I made my living. And then I also lived with the poorest people in the world. I had the whole spectrum. I learned about society. I learned how they got my eyes open to how the world was working back then. So anyway, eventually I ended up, after teaching many years in foreign countries, teaching all those courses you were listing there, and the professor of all of these, I came back to the United States and ended up at Cornell University. And I did that because I had a girlfriend who was going to go to school there. She was a foreign student and going to go to Cornell. And so I ended up there, and I went into the physics department, and I thought, I'll go to the physics department at Cornell, see if I can get my PhD here, just apply because I'm here. So when I'm in the physics department, Doug Fitchin was the head of the chairman of the physics department. He's looking over my resume, and he said, look, Jim, it's really hard to get into this graduate school. We take mostly foreign students. The waiting list is really long. It's very specialized. But you can teach here. And so
wow.
I got a job teaching at Cornell as an introductory faculty member there. And I was the only person there with a master's degree in physics. So a lot of times people say, well, where did you become a professor? Well, it was all those years in foreign countries where that's what I was. And so at any rate, Cornell was an eye-opener because in those preparatory years, I was studying some celestial mechanics problems. It's something I learned in college. It's the study of the stars and the planets and the motion using gravity. And at the time, only gravity was believed to affect the motion of the stars, etc. But I had done something in my studies. I said, what if you include electric and magnetic fields with these? What does it look like? What happens? And so I learned what the fields look like and how they interact and how some of the principles, like only the smallest particles are affected because they have the highest charge to mass ratios. That means they had more charge for their size, for their mass, and therefore electricity affected them much more. And so how those worked in, for example, and then when I got to Cornell, I started looking at data that was coming in from spacecraft and around the planet, and I came to the conclusion that comets were not dirty snowballs. They were not some little ball of ice that when it got near the sun, it started to melt, and that's where the material from the tail came from. I decided that these were discharges, a rocky object coming in, and I always, I know, bring this down to a level where people can understand. We have all seen the backyard bug killer. It's like an electrical device. It's got a fluorescent light in the middle, and it hangs out in your backyard. Mm-hmm. And the bug flies into it, and that, kills the bug, and the bug falls down, and it kills bugs. The solar system, the sun was doing the same thing. So when a rocky object came in from afar, it would discharge the solar capacitor, and so what we see is just like the bug. You see this discharge, but what we see is the positive ions and material flowing into this negatively charged nucleus. And it worked exactly the same way in outer space. So then I had to find where this charge was coming from, like this outer space battery. So then I realized that the fusion of the sun was at the surface, and about this time I was working with some Russian scientists eventually. So my discoveries came when I was at Cornell, and this was 1979 to 81. So I started publishing my work, and one day Doug Fitchin, the head of the physics department, calls me in. He has a bunch of my papers, which were being published in peer-reviewed physics journals, and he goes, "What's this?" And he's really mad. And I said, "Well, it looks like you got some of my papers on your desk." He goes, "Yeah, well, you are fired as of this moment. You cannot use Cornell's name anymore.
Wow.
And, we teach correct science here." And he said, "I can't I can't fire you because we're in the middle of the semester. So you're going to complete your coursework. But a woman named Betty Richardson had to follow me around literally. She was a PhD faculty member whenever I was with students, and so I would not talk to students about my work. And she was there if I was in a laboratory, if I was in a lecture session or whatever it was. And at the end of that semester, that was it. So anyway, I had been working in the math department there. So I went across campus, and I got rehired by the math department to teach mathematics there. So now, when my papers are coming to be published, I said, well, I'm in the math department, so I started putting JAMES McCANNEY, Department of Mathematics, Cornell University. And this was
oh, my goodness.
So the bombshell that hit me was coming from the astronomy department. Carl Sagan was there. The Cosmos series was going on. In fact, when I was there, Carl was in Los Angeles making the Cosmos series, the 13-part mega TV science series on Cosmos. So I really didn't see him, but all of the NASA scientists were at Cornell, the big bulk of them. NASA was a depository of NASA information. So every day, the data was coming in. There were meetings in the afternoon that sometimes went late into the night when new data was coming in. I had access to all this data.
Okay, we got to take a 4-minute break. When we come back after this break, I'm going to ask him, now how does all this relate to our world? Because this is way above where the average person is, including myself. How does this relate to our world? We'll be back after this 4-minute break. James McCANNEY. James McCANNEY, noted physicist and mathematician, joins us today. And we're talking about, we're going to get to the subject of Comets, which is his new ebook at his website. You can go to thepowerhour.com and click on his website, click on the guest section and take you to his website. Also, it will tell you about his radio show that he does on WWCR. That you can listen to every week also. James McCANNEY joins us with this new book called Comets. It's an e-book. It's only $16.95, an amazing amount of information. This is what, James, your latest of what, 6 or 7 books?
This is number 7.
Number 7,
and,
okay.
Yeah, and I chose an e-book format because with the color plates, with the this book would cost a lot to print and a way lot more to buy. So
absolutely.
So $16.95 is really not much at all. But you can get the book free if you buy the previous 5 books and a set, all of them in ebook format. You buy the previous 5-book set for $65, and you get the new ebook Comets free. So that's the offer that's on the webpage right now, and as you said, linked from your page.
Okay. And also, you're mentioning these terms, electrical field, plasma discharge, celestial mechanics. I mean, a lot of those things just go right past us. Now, when we're talking in terms of what all that means and what you've been talking about in the first 20 minutes, how does that relate to where we are today? What is the implication of all these things to our life today on this planet?
Well, it's everything that happens here just about is related to electricity. One of the biggest things is weather. And one of my early realizations with my studies was that almost all of our weather is electrically driven from outer space. And I show how in fact, my 4th book is called, I call it the weather book. It's called Principia Meteorologia, the Physics of Sun-Earth Weather, and that sounds like a mouthful. But the book is 300 pages written for the general public. First, it analyzes our weather and just solar light coming in, which is what the meteorologists assume, that light comes in from the sun, causes all of our weather, the storms, everything. And I show how absurd this is, because how do you gather all of this sunlight, which comes in evenly all over and sometimes is blocked by the clouds, and all of a sudden it forms a tornado over here, or a hurricane. It is so absurd, it's against all laws of physics. And so that's one way. Another way, and this is what the ancients talk about. The ancients talk about what I call the big comets, the great comets. and I put that in capital letters, the great comets, because we have not seen anything like this in modern times. We have seen them at a distance, but then I realized a property which I emphasize in all of my books. It's called action at a distance. So comets can affect the solar surface. Comets can that can cause solar storms to come out and affect our weather directly, or cause a power outage, things like that. So we live in this electrical universe. I coined that term. The other thing that is happening is that comets the big ones can become planets. They become captured into our solar system, and when they do, they wreak havoc with the other planets, including Earth. And the ancients talk about this. And so I entered into this realm thinking I'm just doing science. I'm just promoting my work. It's being proven by space probe data. The Russians became very interested in the mid-90s because it explained a lot of the data they were seeing on atmospheric electricity that they couldn't explain. But how does this affect the average person? Well, this year is interesting, and the reason I put this book out this year is 2013 has a number of big comets coming. These are going to fill up the sky.
Okay, now before you continue, now we've heard of Comet Hale-Bopp, Hale-Bopp, Comet Elenin. We hear about asteroid, and for everybody, if you would just define the difference between a comet, an asteroid, how many different types of particles should we be concerned about that might be coming toward the planet?
Thanks, Joyce, for keeping me directed here, because that's a perfect question, and here's why. When I was studying the electrical conditions in the solar system, it turns out that every particle in outer space around the sun is in this electrical capacitor, I call it. It's like a big plasma gas battery. The Earth, the smallest particles, the moons, the asteroids, all of them are discharging this. So literally the Earth acts like a comet.
Okay, we got to go to this break, and we'll come back. Earth acts as a comet. We'll be right back after this 3-minute break with James McCann. Stay tuned. This is Joyce Riley, the Power Hour. But I thank you all for joining us today. We're talking about comets, the relationship to us. What does this mean to us with James McCannney? I want to just remind you that we've got a number of items at the Power Hour on special. Stories, Basic Country Skills, Natural Remedies Encyclopedia, still the Oxy Lift products, Oxy Earth, Oxy Flush, and you get a free bottle of Oxy Lift when you purchase any of those items. Also, we have the book Restoring Political Honesty, and that book was normally $15 by Alan Jones. It's now $11 at the Power Hour. And Clouded Titles by Dave Krieger. That's really the ultimate book on the fraud in the mortgage industry and how to undo or unencumber your title. It's on special for $39.95 by Dave Krieger. We have an inventory clearance on rice bran solubles, organic barley green juice, which that's the one I use. I just had it right here, right now. Pure Barley Caps, Enzyme Advantage, Mighty Kids, and Royal Oil. So give a call to 877-817-9829, 877-817-9829, or go to thepowermall.com. And just to remind you that Robert Redfern will be on the program this Thursday, so all of his products are on special too. We're talking to James McCannney, who is well known in his field. So many of you have requested that we have him on the program today. He has a new book called Comets, and we're going to find out why that book is important and why it is different than what the mainstream tells you. But what is it that we need to be concerned about? We're concerned about comets. You mentioned moons. You mentioned, or of course, we hear about asteroids. What is it that we need to be concerned about, or how many things do come at our planet?
Well, Joyce, the vast majority of things in outer space do not come near us. They don't affect us, and they have no effect on us at all. It's a very rare occasion when Earth or Mars is directly affected by something coming by. But just to give an example, this coming year, Mars has two major comets coming right at it. One is going to miss in October by only 7 million miles, and it's something we can all see in the morning sky. Its designation, its official designation, is called C2012S1, and I talk about that in the book. But everybody can get up early in the morning and go out and look in the morning sky, and you can see Mars. It's a red dot up in the sky. But now, in coming mid-September of this year, we will see a comet right next to it, and hopefully we're going to see some electrical interactions, and possibly Mars will actually disappear in the coma of this comet. NASA and the other standard science outlets are not mentioning this. They don't want anybody to see this because it's going to prove, if it has these effects, it's going to prove my work 100%.
Okay, now your work versus their work. Now, what are we going to be proving here?
Okay, well, let's what I call the axioms of astronomy. Let's compare standard science with mine, and these are 4 basic points. First of all, standard science says outer space is electrically neutral. There's no electricity out there. Nothing electrical can happen, including with the sun or anything else. I say, no, space is just screaming with electricity. Everything that happens out there has electrical effects, and it's very subtle. Most objects really don't have what you'd call measurable electrical effects until some major electrical interaction occurs, and all of a sudden our weather kicks up. How many times have you seen big tornado systems and they were never predicted by the National Weather Service? This is because those alignments, those combination of many factors line up, and wham, we get hit. So electricity is ever present out there, but it only affects us in very special occasions. Okay, number 2, we're taught by standard science from grade school to the PhD in astronomy that the universe began 4.5 billion years ago, and the solar system and all the planets, and really nothing has happened since. It's a dead, sterile, unchanging universe. All the planets are the same, and I'm saying, no, this is a shooting match out here. This is a billiard game of celestial billiards, and these things are flying around, and we can have new planets forming at any time. And these are rare events, but we do see these, and that's one thing the book points out. So I say, no, outer space is tremendously dynamic, that we have to watch for these events, and outer space is ever changing. It's not a dead, stagnant thing that happened 4.5 billion years ago. Okay, number 3, they say that the universe began in a Big Bang, and they say this because they see red-shifted, that's a condition of light, which implies that things are moving away from us. And I'm saying, no, that redshift is caused by electrical conditions around the galaxy nuclei, around the quasar nuclei, around our sun, and this gives us that redshift, so it has nothing to do with things moving away. So we don't live in a Big Bang universe. We live in an ever-constant developing universe, and these principles can be proven in a laboratory, and I show how this is done. And then the 4th one is the big one. The standard science says that comets are dirty snowballs. They melt when they're near the sun. This is a concept that goes back to Kepler, who back in the Middle Ages, who was the first person to realize that comets were out there. Prior to that, Aristotelian belief from the Greeks was taught through thousands of years that comets were fire in the sky, and Kepler said, no, they're way out there. They're in orbit around the sun, and he said, well, they must be something like an ice ball that melts when they get near the sun. And that's why the tail always points away from the sun. And I say, no, these are very active electrical discharges of the solar capacitor. And I set up, in 1979, when I'm setting up my experiments to prove my concepts, I said, we're going to find eventually X-rays to the sunward side of comets, way out away from the comet. Not seemingly having anything to do with the comet. We're going to find X-rays. 1996, they were discovered. But at that point, NASA was in the mode of covering up data, of finding any reason to not allow my work to come into prominence. And that's just one of my major predictions. That how does a little ice ball produce X-rays? It's so absurd, and out 30,000 miles to the sunward side. But how does this affect us? Well, the end result is that our weather, our severe weather, is driven by electrical conditions in the solar system. The Weather Service cannot predict or explain these past floods. We were having tremendous winds all over the United States, and I know you saw them where you were because everybody saw them all over. It would blow like crazy for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes. You know, what's going on here? The trees are bending over, and then all of a sudden it would stop. And then 20 minutes later, the wind would be coming from the other direction, blowing like crazy, and then it would stop. And we'd go, what's going on here? These are electrical effects that I explain how these work. And so our lives are directly affected. If it were not for electricity in our atmosphere, we wouldn't have clouds, we wouldn't have thunderstorms, we wouldn't have tornadoes, we wouldn't have hurricanes. Any of the severe weather that you see, we wouldn't have jet streams that blow the weather systems around. None of this would happen if we did not have these electrical conditions. So it affects our lives every day. But the biggest thing is some of these big comets, and they're rare, but we're going to see some this year. And this is what's this is why the public has to get ready. Because when you start seeing these comets up in the sky and they're lighting up like a light bulb, literally, and you can see them in the daytime sky, lit up like a neon light bulb up there. That's because the electricity is passing through these comets. It's literally a neon light bulb in outer space, but it has not just neon, it has carbon dioxide, it has water, it has all these other elements that are literally lighting up out there like a light bulb. And the other thing is we're probably going to see other planets, including Mars, possibly Jupiter, and possibly Earth, having some of these electrical effects. And I describe all of these. And so, first of all, I give the scientific explanation, but then I also give what you are going to see, the visual effects. The guy standing down here on Earth. And here's the point, that, and this is what I discovered over many years. I thought, what is it about this concept of snowball comets that they have to keep pushing that it's just so incorrect, it doesn't make any sense. We have been to 7 comets now, taking pictures of the nuclei, and they're hot, dry rocks. There's no ice, there's no snow, but they keep saying these are icy little wanderers, little snowy poof balls out there. And it's so absurd, and I thought, this is not even rational. Why do they keep pushing this? And then it dawned on me that if the average person knew this and that they were electrical, the second question would be, well, if there's all this electricity out there, can't we grab some of this to run our energy needs? And the answer is yes. We can drive our energy needs from outer space. And a guy named Nikola Tesla, around the turn of the century, was doing this. He had a way of capturing electricity from the upper ionosphere and distributing it on the electrical grid. And they shut him down. Westinghouse, who owned all of the electrical technology at the time for distributing electricity, they went out and tore down his towers, his generating equipment that extracted electricity from the ionosphere, and created all kinds of myths about this. So you can see that if the average person knew that I was right, and the very second question is going to be, well, why don't we grab some of this? That we don't need coal, we don't need oil, we don't need nuclear, we don't need natural gas. Imagine the power in a hurricane that this is being driven by these electrical conditions. Imagine gathering all that power and converting it into electricity every day. This happens all over the world. Every day we have severe weather and being driven by these electrical conditions. We could be tapping into this all over the world to run our society. And for free. Once you build the equipment, you don't need any more. You don't have to burn coal or oil or burn nuclear fuel with its terrible waste problem that nobody wants to talk about. Look at the industries that this affects. Now you're going to start to understand why they will not touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Well, to those of us that don't know a comet from an asteroid or who aren't involved in this, again, what is the implication? Because, I mean, when you're talking about weather, we understand the importance of weather, of course, but we also understand that and believe, I personally believe, that a lot of our weather is manipulated, is created weather.
Right.
So what is it that these comets are going to be doing, or what you said we need to be preparing for these comets? Prepare in what form or fashion?
Well, this year it's going to be mainly visual. We're going to have two comets that are going to affect Mars. But what people will realize is that if it's doing that to Mars, it can do it here. And it has happened in the past. All of the ancient cultures talk about these big comets, the Hopi Indian. I just did this past year a special with the History Channel, and my specialty there was the Hopi Indians, the Hopi legends, talking about the big comet. And they're very specific that the big comets are the ones that cause these major disasters, the floods, the high winds, the other effects that the ancients talk about. And so it's very easy for standard science, NASA, the astronomy community to say, that's all foolishness. We don't believe any of that, because we haven't seen any recently. In the last 1,000 years, the big comets have gone far away. They have not affected us. We had a comet in 1680, the Great Comet of 1680, that actually we saw rocks raining out of the sky in parts of Earth as a result of this, but it didn't have that big local major effect, electricity, etc., on Earth. We have a comet that next September we're going to see this happening to Mars, and then in January we are going to get a bit of a dose of that when this comet and Jupiter line up with us electrically. And so you have to understand that a comet, now just to summarize, a comet is the object with a tail up there. I'm not talking about the shooting stars that come into they call them shooting stars or meteorites, that come into the atmosphere. We're talking about an object that is kind of like painted up in the night sky. It moves very slowly from night to night. And most people don't see these because they're little and you need telescopes to see them. There's always dozens of comets that amateur astronomers can see all year long. But the average person doesn't have equipment to see these. Now we're going to see them this year, where they're going to be visible to the naked eye, and everybody on this planet is going to be mesmerized by these giant objects. And the first thing they're going to say is, they're going to read in the paper that this is a little icy wanderer snowball. And the people are going to go, that ain't no little snowball there. I don't know what they're talking about, but it's not that. And then they're going to look for answers, and then they're going to get to my page in my books, and they're going to start to realize, and then they're going to start to realize why all the lies, why all of the cover-ups, why all of the, in all of my career since the 1970s, I have been fighting this, mainly in the beginning because of just scientific egos, you might say, but more recently because of the ability to grab onto this electrical energy and use it. Because in my third book, Atlantis, the Tesla, the Colburn Connection, my research rediscovered the work of Tesla and explained how it worked, what he was doing. He built these giant towers to collect electricity, and he built them the first time. It would be like building a 747 aircraft by the Wright brothers and having it work just fine. And that's how complicated these devices are that Tesla built. So he had ancient information, and so what I do in that book is I go back to the ancients. Where was Tesla? Where did he get this information? It turned out his dad in Europe, in Eastern Europe, was the curator of one of the Vatican libraries. And so I'm going back into the ancient texts. The Colburn is a book that was brought to me back in the early 90s. There were 3 copies brought into the United States by the Chaldean Trust that was managing these ancient books, and they said they wanted me to explain what these meant. And it starts out and it talks about the big comets, and there were multiple big comets in the sky fighting with each other with electrical discharges, and one would consume the other one. So the point is that these affected people in historical times, a long time ago, thousands of years ago.
Okay, we've got to go to this 3-minute break, and we're going to take some phone calls. If you want to line up at the phone bar, 855-995-6923 to talk to our guest today, James McCann. James, just to summarize this, if we've got April 15th around the corner. People are worried about that. We've got Second Amendment. We've got people pulling money out of the bank accounts in the EU. Help me understand the importance of this subject. What do we need to be concerned about with respect to comets? Are you there? Well, he should be there, but I don't think he is. We lost our guest. I'll tell you what, while you're trying to get back our guest, let's go to the first caller, and we'll take a call here. Let's go to, I'll tell you what, I'll give you an update on the 18 and 4 while we're waiting for our guest to come back. I know this is a totally different subject, and you really get your mind, okay. All right. James, are you there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. What is the importance of all of this? Like I said, we got April 15th around the corner. We got Second Amendment being threatened. That's where everybody's mind is right now. Why is this important that you're talking about with respect to these comments?
Okay, Joyce, that's really a good question, because I want you to look at the evening news. I want you to look at, what does Obama do? Is there the conflict in the Mideast? All of this stuff is contrived chaos. What does it do? It diverts our attention from what we really should be doing. What's the central thing that we should understand in our lives? And I get to that point in my books. I'm constantly referring to that, because if you realize that the ancients talk about this, the ancients talk about the great disasters that come from comets, do you think people would continue paying their mortgage payments? The thing that the world leaders are most afraid of this coming year, and that's why NASA already is pumping out information about comets, little snowballs, don't worry about them, there's little things out in outer space, etc., don't worry about them, is because they are the mouthpiece of basically the world bankers, who also have a secret, I call it secret society. Am I still there? Am I still online?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Good. I was getting some beeps on my phone, which is unusual when I'm on an interview. But so here's the point. If the people really understood the real issues, they wouldn't pay their house payments. They'd say to the bank and the government, these people don't have any power over me. And so when people see these big comets up in the sky, and they realize that someday one of these is going to come in and rock our boat, at that point, they're going to say, these world leaders don't have any power over that thing up there. It's a power thing. It's a power maintenance thing. Here's an example. In the Middle Ages, the leaders, the kings, told the people that the world was flat. And so what if you were a young, really vibrant young man, and you were bursting at the seams, and you wanted to go out and change the world and do things? You would start building ships, you'd start going off and exploring. But if you thought the world was flat, and when you sailed out there, you'd fall off the ends of the ocean, and there were fire-breathing dragons there, well, there's not a lot of incentive to do that. Today, we have flat Earth science, and all of this science, solar system formed 4.5 billion years ago, nothing has happened since. If any star explodes, it's way out there. It's not one of ours. And so all of this, the dirty snowball comet model, is flat Earth science. Because if the people realize the way the solar system really works, and that this is a dynamic place, and not to mention that, I have discovered propulsion systems, and these systems have been tested, and one of them was stolen by the military when I was out in Los Angeles back in the early 1980s. Electromagnetic propulsion system, and I call it the electric rivers to the stars. How do we move around the solar system and stars?
Okay, we got to go to this break. We got a 1 minute, 10-second break. That's all we're going to be gone. We'll be back with James McCanny. We'll take your phone calls. Now we get it. Ooh, this is going to get interesting. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We're talking to James McCANNey today, the importance of comets. I think we can all understand the fact that they don't want anyone to see who is behind the curtain, and that it may not be what we think it is. That really does help to get to what's going on here. Let me go to a couple of callers here first and see where the listeners are on this. Let me go to Renee in North Carolina. Renee, you're on the air. Go ahead, please, with James McCANNey.
Yes, this man is proving the point I try to make here a lot. You know, particularly a lot of conservatives have been trained as a diversion to scapegoat the poor as the problem. Our biggest, and don't get me wrong, they can be a problem, but our biggest problem, yes, are the elite, but all the yes men and the professional and political class of all our institutions, all these white-collar professionals who are continuing to feed us lies because as the, quote, professionals and authority figures who are the keepers of the knowledge, if it ever gets out that they are so wrong, that's in psychology, medicine, law, science, if it ever gets out, their cushy little job where, they get paid the big bucks for being the authorities goes down the tube. Okay.
Wow, Renee, I'm going to cut in here because I'm just bursting inside. Thank you for saying this. This is the core issue. With those guys up on the top, don't know their names, those European bankers and their families of thousands of people who run that they can go into a senator's office and say, I want you to move this money into this company, and I want you to start a war over here, and I want you to do this. But it takes all of these little yes men down there making their salary, making their money. You got the goons in the Homeland Security. You got they're all making their paycheck, and none of them think of what they're doing to their fellow man. Oh, yes, thank you.
Yes, and you see, because they conveniently don't see what they're doing, because they're not going out and, literally sticking a knife into the eyeballs of people. They're able to lie to themselves. Okay, one of my favorite lies, it's the new version of I was just following orders. But it's my job. I have to make a living. I need a paycheck. That is the rationalization people do to take effectively the devil's paycheck and not feel guilty about it. And a lot of people go along with this because they're like, well, I like Sally, the teller at the bank. She gives my dog treats. Okay? The thing is, there's a lot of people that are working in these institutions, and we don't want to be not nice. We want to let them off the hook. They'll make us feel bad. We don't want to be mean to Sally. So the thing is, this is the effective web that holds this into place.
Renee, don't forget the preachers out there, those guys that make you feel good and have you send your money to them.
Yeah. Well, they're the worst. They're the worst because they will not confront these people because they want their percentage of the devil's paycheck put in their basket.
Hey, thank you very much, Renee, for the phone call. Very good.
Well,
yes, James.
Great call, Joyce. And this is, now people go, what do comets have to do with me? Renee, she understands, but now what we're putting together with what Renee is talking about is what I've done with the science. And the NASA scientist is the epitome. These guys are treated like gods. They fly around the world. They have never worked a day in their life, really. I mean, they're treated like, once you get your PhD, if you get hired by NASA, it's a big deal. These guys have egos that won't quit. And it's like they cannot be wrong. But they're blocking the way. They're taking the most valuable resource that we have is the space program, and they're telling us that in 25 years they're going to put a guy on the moon again. What are you talking about?
On the moon again? We'll be right back after this break with James McCANNey. And Josh has got a question. He'll be up first after this 3-minute break. Stay tuned to the Power Hour. Joyce Riley with James McCANNey. So pleased to have James McCANNey joining us today. His website is at thepowerhour.com guest section, and how to get his book on Comets, $16.95. Really an excellent opportunity to take advantage of that book because there are so many color plates in it. You can print it out yourself and save a lot of money. I would highly recommend that book. We are talking to James McCANNey. All kinds of kudos coming in for people that are loving this show and want to hear more from James McCANNey. I want to go to Josh right now, who is my Friday cohort, my co-host on Fridays here at the Power Hour. He's listening. And Josh, you wanted to ask a question or have a comment for James McCANNey? Welcome to the Power Hour today.
Well, thanks for having me. Yes, I did have a question. I was wondering if he is familiar with the works of Immanuel Velikovsky, I believe is how you pronounce his name.
Absolutely, Josh. My work is, throughout my work, I talk about Velikovsky. The books that you see today have been published since about the year 2000. But how I became acquainted with Velikovsky, I was at Cornell in 79 to 81, 2 years. I was in the physics department and mathematics department, and I didn't realize the hornet's nest that I had stepped into, because in 1976, Carl Sagan and the scientific community buried Velikovsky. Velikovsky was succeeding. He had written 3 books in around the 1950s era, and they were the international bestsellers for all of that time, leading up into the 70s. When I was at Cornell, I had not heard of Velikovsky, so I didn't know what I was dealing with here, why the scientists were so mad at me. Why was I getting fired for trying to publish some esoteric science paper about comets? What's the deal? And so I didn't realize. So in about 1982, after I had been tossed out of Cornell, and I was on my own, this friend of mine calls me up, and he says, your work sounds a bit like this guy Velikovsky, and he couldn't say it right, but yeah, Velikovsky is the name. And I said, what's that? So I picked up the books and I started reading them, and I go, holy cow, this guy has studied the ancient texts. He was a master of ancient literature. And here's what Velikovsky was studying, just to set the record straight. Velikovsky, back in the 1930s and 40s, had access to some of the major historical museums of the world. And he was an expert in Sanskrit and the ancient languages. And what he wanted to do was create a calendar of ancient times, because we have all of these countries. We got Egypt, we got China, we got Tibet, we got all these other countries all over the world. And so he thought, what if there was a major event that happened all over the world, and it could establish a timeline? Now we would be able to compare the histories of these. This is what Velikovsky was doing. He was a guy in the museum doing a very esoteric study. And what he came up with is that all of these disjoint, separated entities, civilizations, all talk about Venus coming in as a great comet. It was captured by Jupiter and then wandered through the solar system for hundreds and hundreds of years, had an interaction with Mars, where it relieved Mars of its oceans and atmosphere. The people saw it. Mars used to be a blue planet. And then it had 2 major interactions with Earth. And the Mayans talk about this, the Hopi, the Tibetans, the Japanese, the Europeans, all of these cultures talk about these events exactly the same. And it all had to do with Venus. And then eventually Venus, the comet, wandered in and became the planet Venus we see today. So anyway, in 1950, the astronomical community was asked by the press. They said, this guy Velikovsky, he's got his book, 14 languages, the bestseller that Macmillan had. Macmillan was a textbook company. And so they said, what do you say? You're saying that this guy is wrong, but you don't even have a story yourself. So at that time, the astronomical community ran out and established those 4, what I call axioms of astronomy: the Big Bang, electrically neutral space, the comets are little snowballs, and they said, this is what they are. This is what astronomy is. And so through the ages, and up to when I got to Cornell in 79, as I said, in 76, Carl Sagan, the reason he got the Cosmos series to be a superstar was because he had solidified the scientific communities to battle Velikovsky and bury him. They said, we got to get rid of this guy. He's all known all over the world, and we're not. And our science is not known. So anyway, the short story is that Velikovsky was studying calendars, and all he said was that the ancients all talked about this comet Venus. So Velikovsky's mistake was that he was not a scientist. So what did he do? He went out and he started studying the science of the day. And so he tried to use that science, which was totally incorrect, to try and explain how Venus could become, the comet could become the planet. Well, when I hit Cornell in 79, I didn't realize all of this. So here I come along using NASA data at Cornell, where Carl Sagan was chief, and I'm using NASA data to prove that comets are not dirty snowballs, that they can become planets. So wow. You see kind of this bombshell, this beehive that I entered, and why they didn't like me. And at the time I didn't realize it. Well, now I do. But anyway, wow. Your question was about Velikovsky, and so Velikovsky was studying the historical records, and that's something I do. And when I was wandering around down in Mexico and Guatemala and South America when I was a kid after college, trying to find my something, I didn't know what I was trying to find. I was following my nose. But like I say, the Quetzal bird, I'm in a little hut down in Quintana Roo, southeastern Mexico, and I'm buying some food for the day. And they don't speak Spanish. They only spoke Mayan there. They were still this little lady about 4 feet tall, looked like a little bird. And there was a Quetzal bird sitting up on the roost. And I was there about sundown, so the Quetzal bird flies at night, just like a comet. That's why they call it the Quetzal bird. And this bird flies up over my head in this little hut in the middle of the jungle. And I look up at the plumage, and it looks like this long, flowing comet. I thought, that's interesting. And she goes, yeah, the Quetzal bird, you know. And so that I'm now, you know, fast forward from 1971 to 79 at Cornell, I'm studying the ancient Mayan text, the Popol Vuh, that's talking about Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent god of the night sky, whose heart eventually becomes the planet Venus. And so I'm putting this together with my science work, and so I'm mixing ancient text with my science work, realizing that these ancients saw this, but they only had their words to describe it. And so anyway, that's a good question.
Wow, thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you for that answer. Thank you, Josh. Thank you so much. We miss you here.
Yes, I miss you too. I just wanted to encourage people, if they can find, I found 2 copies of his book, 2 different copies, Worlds in Collision and Ages in Chaos, or something like that. And those books blew me away. They're great compilations of, like you said, the ancient text describing this electrical activity of space objects. So.
Right. And Josh, I want to tell people too, go directly to those books. It's Worlds in Collision, Ages in Chaos, and Earth in Upheaval are the 3 bombshell Velikovsky books. You read the books. Don't go to a website where somebody tells you all about Velikovsky. Go read those books, and I'll repeat them. Worlds in Collision, that's the big one. That's one that's going to take your glasses out in another dimension. So Worlds in Collision, Ages in Chaos is where he goes back to the geological record. He's the one that talks about coal beds, where the plant matter in coal is all built up plant matter. It's not decayed plant matter. He talks about the Siberian mammoths that are flash frozen there in tundra, and these are tropical animals. These are animals that lived in the tropics. They died with fresh, undigested plant matter in their throats. That's how fast they were flash frozen. And this was within the last 10,000 years. So Earth had a pole shift. It was about 30 degrees. The North Pole, it used to be north of the state of Michigan in what we call Ontario. That's where the old North Pole used to be. So just a little story. When in the 90s, I purchased some traditional surveying equipment, and I went down into these old cities, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Tyco, and I surveyed them, and I said, something is strange here, Tulum. And I surveyed the base coordinates of these cities, and then I drew those lines north. And they're not based on what we have north, east, south, and west. For example, Chichen Itza is built about 13.5 degrees askewed from true north. Don't you think these people that have all of this architecture designed for the solar system and the sun and coordinated with the calendars, etc., don't you think they would have built on a northeast, southwest coordinate system? But the reality is the old North Pole. What we see are the modern Maya of around 800 AD, but they built their cities on the grid structure of the old cities, which were thousands of years old. And so if you drew lines from the north-south direction of all these other cities, and from the Mideast, etc., they all come up to a point in central Canada in Ontario. And that's when the Laurentian ice shield melted. It's funny to see a National Geographic special issue on the Laurentian ice cap, and they show it askewed. It's over in central Canada and reaching out, almost out to Oregon, down into Nebraska, and it reaches up to about where the North Pole is now, and there's no glacier at all in Russia, in Siberia. And I'm laughing. How does one side of the Earth have all this glacier and the other side doesn't?
Okay, we got to go to a break. We got a 4-minute break. We will be back. And Michael in Ohio, you'll be up next. Stay tuned to the Power Hour with James McCANNey. This is Joyce Ryan. Let's go to Michael in Ohio. Michael, you're on the air with James McCANNey. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Joyce.
Morning.
James.
Hi, Michael.
Yeah, James, I've also read Balakowski's books and Tesla. I got 4 or 5 Tesla books I've read. And I think what they did to Balakowski, they're doing to you today. They're discrediting you. And I'm going to give you a kudos or congratulations for keep going.
Yes. Yes.
Also, I saw a thing on History Channel something about Nostradamus, which I only give him maybe 15 or 20% credibility. But it did say one of his quatrains, and I'll paraphrase it. He says, "And when the comet comes by, there will be thirst and hunger." There's also that would be one of my questions. What's the worst could happen? You think there's also a man that I don't know if you heard of him, James Lloyd. I got a video from him he's up in Oregon about called Angels in Orbit, where he talks about Mars used to come into our orbit in between us and the moon. And cause a lot of electrical discharges. And it's amazing how they figured out. One thing amazing about it was that they know now that it used to come in once in March and then in October. And you're talking about these comets coming in October, and I find this just like what's going on here. Yeah,
October, November. Do you have a question for him specifically?
Basically, what's the worst thing that could happen in his views? I'm looking for Earth changes. Okay,
right. We'll let him answer. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, my first book, which hit the streets in around the year 2000, it's called Planet X: Comets and Earth Changes, and this is something. Let me explain a little bit about the books. In 1979, I had written books, more scientific books, and then I had written my papers. I presented at the American Geophysical Union. So you have to understand, even though I was kind of thrown out and discredited, I still maintained my scientific presence because I knew I was right. I knew that someday they had to break through and understand and accept what I was doing. So I kept up. I would pay my way to American Geophysical Union meetings. I presented around the world. I did lecture series. And all these guys knew me. Goddard Space Flight Center, JPL. And I presented at Los Alamos National Laboratories. I could pick up the phone and talk to just about any scientist, and they knew me. Yeah, it's Jim. How's it going? Talk to me about various things. It all changed in around 1996 when they discovered the X-rays in comets. But back to Michael's question, my books right now, the 7 books that are available, I'll quick name them off, but are meant for the general public. In other words, I took the core issues, and after understanding how this bad science was driven by the world powers. And like I say, they want to promote flat Earth science, and it's a control issue. They want to control you. So my books are Planet X, Comets, and Earth Changes, which answers Michael's question. The second one is very important. It's called Surviving Planet X Passage. And I have diagrams and pictures, and I have the 6 months prior to passage, during the passage itself, and then the 6 months after the passage of a Planet X type of object. And by the way, if there is a Planet X type object that happens, and by the way, there are none that I'm aware of in the solar system at this time, and I should repeat, don't look at any YouTube videos with me on it. I don't put anything on YouTube. My name is plastered all over YouTube, like I'm saying there's all kinds of things going on. I don't do anything on YouTube. I only post on my own page. But, okay, so Surviving Planet X Passage is the second book. Atlantis to Tesla, The Colburn Connection is my third book. The fourth book is called Principia Meteorologia, The Physics of Sun-Earth Weather, 300-page major document on weather, where I start out, I explain what the standard meteorological explanations for weather are, and I rip them apart and I just laugh at them. I say, this is ridiculous. And then I show you how weather is formed and how it builds and et cetera. The fifth book is called Calculate Primes, and I solved the oldest problem in mathematics. I'm also a mathematician, and that's where a lot of my mathematics and teaching and telecommunications background came out. But the next book is called The Diamond Principle, and it's an analysis of modern society. And then the next book is Comets.
Okay, we got to go to this break. Stay tuned to the Power Hour. This is Joyce Riley with our guest, James McCANNEY. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Power Hour. Thank you for joining us. Caring about your world. We're talking to our guest today, James McCANNEY. A lot of you have recommended. I know it was Robert that recommended the last time that we have him on the program, and I thank him very much for joining us. We need to get to talking about applications and implications for today's world and what people need to be doing, because he's walking the walk also. I just want to remind you, please, that to purchase from the good guys. If we all buy from each other, those are the good guys that you choose to buy from, then we keep each other in business. If we buy from the bad guys, we keep the bad guys in business. Now, how much easier could it be? So we encourage you to purchase curcumin, which is on special at the Power Mall. Curcumin, the greatest anti-inflammatory known to man, really, is curcumin, the X4180 caps that we have. It's normally $38.95. It's now on special for $34.25. Let me also tell you there are people that are charging $72 for that now. We have not increased our price and don't want to until we absolutely have to. So please take advantage of getting the curcumin, Blockbuster, homocysteine, Sleep Well, probiotics, whatever it is, from Good Health Naturally are on special at the Power Mall. Also, the green barley powder that I use, the organic, certified organic green barley powder, that is the absolute best that I know of, and I encourage you to get that from the Power Mall. We have some clearance items that are close to expiration date that you can get at a really, really good price. Call us at 877-817-9829, 877-817-9829, or go to thepowermall.com. Worst case, I want to go over that again, and also the implications for people to know about, and then I'll go to John in Tennessee. These people have been so patient and holding on for so long. What is the worst case scenario, and what should we be doing now to prepare?
Okay, preparation is something I'm a specialist in. Joyce, you deal with this every day. Preparation is the same whether it's an electric outage for one day or your water goes off for a day, or if it's a 6-month or a 2-year or a forever power outage where it blows out the power system, or a comet comes by, or Planet X, or whatever you want to call it. And by the way, if you see Planet X, it's going to be in the form of a big comet. But at any rate, preparation is the same for everything. You need water, you need food, you need a place to stay, and you better have a way to protect it. Then you better not decide that you got to go out and save Aunt Molly in the middle of all of this. And you got to have your people prepared, and you keep with small groups. Don't get into some big group thing. Keep small. I talk to people and I say, be your own independent country. You are yourself. Take care of yourself, and that's the best you can do. So anyway, preparation is the same. And if let's take the worst case scenario. I mean, the worst case scenario is something that come by, totally change our atmosphere, pollute it to the point where mostly everything would die on Earth and have radical change. But people lived through the last one. That's why we know about it. That's why the ancient texts talk about it. But it rocked the boat, let me tell you. And it came by Earth on 2 occasions. The first time wasn't so bad, but the second one sent Earth back into the cave ages, literally. And so, but let's take a case where a comet comes in by the sun, affects the solar surface, outcome of a big flare, hits Earth, and destroys our electrical grid system. And by the way, I have been preaching, literally, that the powers that be in the world, a naturally occurring power outage isn't going to affect every element of the power grid all over the world. It's going to be spotty. It's going to hit some areas and not others. And so the powers that be are going to use a fake solar storm to pull the power on the power grid. And this is when they're ready to take over and create martial law, because it's the way to shut down everything.
Oh, my.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes,
you want to shut this place down,
wow.
Then they're going to do it. That's why NASA has been prepping that, this year we're going to have a major power outage. And it's true. I mean, I talk about it, that a solar flare could cause a power outage, but what NASA has been thumping, and we are in a very low solar cycle. We're in the lowest solar cycle of all history, going back to Galileo when they first started counting sunspots. We're in the very lowest energy solar cycle of history. But they keep thumping on this, and I'm saying, no, they're doing this for a reason. SpaceWeather.com keeps promoting all of this solar activity. We had an M-class flare yesterday. You would think it was the biggest X-class flare in history, the way they talk about it. No, they're getting ready, and this is being done. Like I say, this is controlled science. These scientists can't just go out and talk to the press. This is all going through controlled release agencies. And so what they're getting ready to do is when they want to take over martial law, they're going to say, a solar flare hit us, and they're going to pull the lever, because by doing that, they can control all of the power going down, not just some of it. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So anyway, but the reality is yes, it could happen. If it's a natural event, some of the grid will survive. And that could be the problem area. Say it was in an area where people were aware and prepared. It could be a real problem for the leaders of the world to have 5% of the people with power. So they got to shut it all down. You see what I'm saying?
Wow. So it is time beyond time to prepare. Let me go to John in Tennessee. John in Tennessee, you're on the air with our guest today, James McCANNey. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Joyce, thank you for bringing the professor on today. It's a great program for homeschoolers.
Yes.
And I've got a bunch of questions, and I'd appreciate it if the guests would give short answers that are to the point so that we can get through them. Number one, has a comet ever crashed directly into the sun? And if so, where on the sun did it hit?
Okay, yes. In fact, recently, the comets, if you study comets like I do, they're doing this all the time. I would say at least a couple times a year. And they're mainly small comets, but we have seen some big ones, and we see the resulting flares that come out. But they don't have to hit the sun. They can come by at a distance, and it's that electrical discharge that snaps into the sun. It's like a spark plug, and out come these big flares. Most flares go off askew in outer space and do not come near us. Some of them affect our weather remotely, but if a big one hits us, which is a rare event, it could take down, you will see electricity shooting out of your light fixtures in your house. This is what would be going on.
Okay. And do you have another question?
Hit the sun, do they hit at the pole, at the equator, or all over?
Anywhere there, it's mainly controlled by gravity. The majority of the motion of those comets. So it's simply where they're coming in, and it could hit any place. There's no special better place or worse place. It's just...
What's your favorite theory of gravity? Have you ever heard of the particle theory of gravity? Do you have an opinion on that or other theories of gravity?
Yes, I certainly do. There are people that say it's electrical and magnetic, and no. Gravity is a force all to its own, and it's really not understood. There are people that have proposed all kinds of gravitons and particles, and all of them break down. There's something that gravity just is there. If you have a mass someplace, it attracts another mass. There's a very interesting theoretical problem. What is the velocity of gravity? So if Jupiter moves out there, it takes 7 minutes for the light to get to us. So we're seeing Jupiter where it was 7 minutes ago. Other galaxies and other objects way out there are light years in history when we see something happen.
What do you think
gravity is different. It's immediate. Let's put it that way.
You mentioned the speed of gravity. Are you familiar with Tom Van Flanderen's work on the speed of gravity?
In fact, Van Flanderen is one of the guys who really posed that question, because imagine he worked for the Naval Observatory. He was the guy under Robert Harrington, and then he headed the Naval Observatory after Harrington died. Harrington was the guy who literally had the NASA contract for the search for Planet X. So it's funny when NASA now denies Planet X and all of this, and they make a big hoopla about it, but NASA had programs searching for Planet X. And Van Flanderen was the assistant of Harrington, and then Van Flanderen headed the Naval Observatory for many years. But yeah, Van Flanderen clarified that theoretical problem as one of his main contributions to astronomy. It's very subtle. But what's the velocity of gravity? But what we've come to learn is that if something moves out there, we don't see the light from it, so we can't measure where it is until, like Jupiter, 7 minutes later. But the gravity is coming to us right now. So it's imagine a computer that's trying to map out where the solar system is. Your light data says one thing, and 7 minutes difference, this is a big amount of time in a computer. So how do you do this theoretically? Anyway, yeah, that's the short answer.
All right. Thank you very much, John, for the phone call and all the good questions. By the way, I taught these listeners everything they're questioning you about today. I want you to know that. And I'm just kidding. And I am just kidding.
These are wonderful questions.
We have the smartest listeners in the world. I'm serious. This is not your normal radio show, that's for sure. Let's go to Dowser in Missouri. Dowser, you're on the air. Go ahead, please, with James McCANNey.
Yes, Dr. McKinney, it's a pleasure to speak to you. I've heard you speak several times on GCN, and, some people, when they speak, you hear a ring of truth. When you speak, I hear this giant universal gong.
I like that.
Thank you. I like that, yeah.
I too had read Velikovsky way back in the 70s, and recently I read a book called Forbidden Science, and I can't remember, you heard, but he postulated in there that these giant rifts down in the Carolinas were caused by these electromagnetic discharges from passing comets or planets. And I wonder if you were aware that. It sounds as though you are.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, the Carolinas also have, they're like lakes. They're like long fingers. And it's where these rocks came in. There are rock fields all over the world that people don't know where they came from. But in the Carolinas, these are big, long, kind of oval-shaped lakes, and they're all like parallel. It's like, what caused this? But anyway, the idea is that these rocks came in and at an angle and just bulldozed out these lakes is basically what happened. It burns up in the process, and yeah, so absolutely. The world is so full of data. A guy in the 1800s, Ignatius Donnelly was his name. He was the lieutenant governor of Minnesota. He was raised in the coal fields of Pennsylvania, where he saw coal layered up and then gravel and then coal. And then he moved to Minnesota and became lieutenant governor. Then he wrote a book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. So he described Atlantis before the great catastrophe, whatever it was, and then the world after. And what he noted was that all of the naturalists that came out into the West as they explored, they said there was evidence everywhere of a massive flood. And then people used the wood, the driftwood for firewood and other things. And by the 1900s, this is a point that Velikovsky made, that by the 1900s, all of the data had been destroyed by man's development. But you have to go back to see what these naturalists saw. And that's why it's so easy for scientists to say there's no data to warrant thinking that some disaster happened to Earth. But still, the basic geology, mountain building, I talk about plate tectonics, another bad science, fairy tale science. Sure, the Earth has plates, but if you took a globe and Earth and had it formed by the process that standard science says, it formed 4.5 billion years ago and started to cool with nothing else happening, you would have a perfect billiard ball smooth surface, and the plates would be separating from each other, and they would never be riding up over one another. And, so the only way you get mountains is if some big thing comes by, sends a gravitational wave into Earth, and sends these massive gravitational waves, literally, like a tidal wave of land moving across the ocean. And I describe these in my books and in my radio show and my lectures. Imagine 100-foot tidal wave of land coming at you at 1,000 miles an hour. Okay? And when that land wave hits the mountain range that's over there, it takes all that energy and piles it up on top of that existing mountain range. Go to the Rocky Mountains. You see mountain range built on mountain range built on mountain range, coming from all different directions. These are the great land waves that have come through Earth during these events.
Interesting. All right, thank you very much for the phone call, Dowser. I appreciate that very much. Let's go to Annie in Indiana. By the way, after the break, I'm going to have an announcement on someone who's going to be attending the expo in Lebanon, Missouri, that you are going to love to hear about. Let's go to Annie in Indiana. Go ahead, please, Annie.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, I also have Donnelly's book on Atlantis, and I've long enjoyed it. But I'm calling to ask you to elaborate on a statement that you previously made that just blew me away. After the Alexandrian Library was burnt, the Vatican Library, the basement, has become the depository of all ancient and hidden knowledge. And I know that Christopher Columbus's father worked at the Vatican and had access to the maps in the Vatican Library. So when Columbus sailed west, he knew he would not fall off a, quote, flat earth. And you mentioned earlier that Nikola Tesla's father also had access to the Vatican Library. And something in my mind went cha-ching. One of my dreams is to be hide out in the Vatican Library and be locked in there for a weekend so I could read my little eyes out till Monday morning.
Yeah, you would need more than a weekend.
I know I would. Could you elaborate on Tesla's father having access to those records?
Yes, absolutely. And now the church where Tesla's father was based was destroyed by Clinton, and I was it in Sarajevo? I'm trying to think. But they sent in what do you call the guided missiles today, the very accurate ones they can send from a ship from 1,000 miles away. And but they blew up that church, and it's like part of the ongoing destruction of history, just like in Iraq. Iraq has buildings tremendous historical value, and they destroyed it all. But before they do that, they go in and they steal all the information. There was a story, probably not a lot of people heard about it, after they went into Iraq. There was a curator of the museum, and there was an interview with him. He's sitting out on the front steps with his head in his hands, and they said, "What's going on here?" He said, "They took it all. They took all the good stuff. They knew exactly where to go." And so all of the records in Iraq, which went back into prehistory, where the CIA went in there and they stole it all, and they walked off under the protection of the U.S. military. And a lot of people don't realize that Iraq, when that war started, had just discovered a new underground city, an ancient city, and it was one of the very advanced ancient cities.
Oh, how tragic. We're going to be back after this 3-minute break with James McCANNey. Final segment coming up, and we do have a couple of callers and the announcement who's going to be at the Lebanon Expos. Welcome back to Power Hour. Thank you all for joining us today. I tell you, what an enlightening program with James McCANNey. There's so many things that we have not talked about. The correlation to the Bible, which we haven't had a chance to get to, and also his thoughts on the moon landing. I'd love to have him back on very soon. James McCANNey, you have just been an amazing, awesome guest today. Huge gong going on around the world. Thank you so much. We got a couple callers left here for you. I also want to let you all know that coming to the expo, April 5th and 6th, is going to be Dr. Cass Ingram and Judy Gray. I mean, what an amazing time. Dr. Cass Ingram, who is the expert on spices and herbs and remedies that actually do work, nature's God's own remedies. He will be at the seminar, and I've got other people that I will hopefully be announcing also. Let me go back to the callers. We've got Eric in New Jersey. Eric in New Jersey, you're on the air with James McCANNey. Go ahead, please.
Hey, Joyce. Hey, Dr. James. How are you? Thank you so much. Had a couple questions. First, if you could address or remind people, when Tesla was put out of business pretty much by the powers that were, or be, he used the frequency that was actually beneficial to the human body. And then when Westinghouse, destroyed and stole all the stuff, they actually decided to go with the 60 hertz, which is destructive frequency to the human body. Right?
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the myths that is propagated today, and there's movies about this, etc., is that Tesla was using his power to transmit power. That's one of the fairy tale myths that they want to promote. They don't want to talk about what he was really doing. And just think of this. Okay, here's what happened. Tesla had developed his generator system, the three-phase motor or generators, the dipole system, all of the grid that we use today, Tesla developed. And so anyway, he sold all of that technology, the coal-burning generators, the electrical grid system, all of the technology he sold to Westinghouse. I think it was about $4 million, which was a lot of dough in those days. But in the contract, he said, I want to use all the power from the grid for some of my experiments, and then as soon as I'm done, I'll give it back and put the power back in. And so Westinghouse didn't know what he was doing. Well, Tesla had built his tower, and he knew that he could tap into that vertical electric field, as I describe in my books. And so anyway, he needed the power to generate, to drill up into the ionosphere, and as soon as that natural energies came flowing down, he knew how to control it, put it back on the grid, and satisfy his contract with Westinghouse. And so they didn't really realize what he was doing. So when they found out that he was getting free electricity and he was going to build his own grid system and compete against them, and he had free electricity and they had to buy coal to burn to create theirs, well, the rest is history. They went down with a bunch of goons, tore down his tower, and then changed the history books so that nobody ever would understand what he did until I came along with my book, Atlantis to Tesla, The Colburn Connection, and I put the connection with the ancient science. Where did Tesla get his information? Anyway,
I am sorry we are out of time. Oh, this has been an amazing time. Thank you, James McCANNey, for joining us today on the Power Hour. There's some questions that I was not able to get to, the email questions. I will go ahead and forward them to James and see if he would be kind enough to respond to those. We've got to have you back on soon. This has been a tremendous program. Thank you, sir, for all that you're doing for all of us. Thank you so very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Very welcome.
You all have a blessed day. Wow, I got goosebumps. The gong and the goosebumps, I got to tell you. I thank you all very much for your incredible questions and comments. Sorry I couldn't get to all of them. Tomorrow, Dave Krieger, and we're going to be talking to Chris Ernesto about drone usage in Africa. and the foreclosure problem. See you tomorrow. Have a blessed day. God bless you all.